with David's second request. Lord, make me to know. Lord, make me to know the measure of my days. Moses says, teach us to number our days. Both men had the same desire to know the length and the brevity of life. I find it amusing that both made this request. They were both asking the Lord, let me know. Let me know the length of my days. And I find it odd as I studied this that they were asking, Lord, teach us. Moses actually says, so teach us to number our days. David says, Lord, make me to know the measure of my days. Both of these men had a grand desire to know and to understand more fully the brevity of life. I believe there's a great need in our world today for us to understand the brevity and the uncertainty of life. I imagine there's many older people in our world today that advise the young and tell them, be careful, because before you know it, your life is spent. And I imagine many young people just shake their heads and walk off as if it won't happen unto them. Amen? Y'all living in a different world from me. They shake their heads and walk off like it won't happen, for they're in the prime of their life as they see it. These two men make a request for this realization. Why? Because it's something that does not come naturally. It's not something that we consciously sit down and think about nor dwell on. Who wants to think about or dwell on getting older? If we did, I tell you, the plastic surgeon would go out of business. We try to fight it. We try to deny it. We try to pretend it's not there and ignore it. We don't want to deal with the fact that we're getting older. We try to dress younger. We try to look younger. We try to act younger. We try to do all these things. It's not in our human nature to want to face the brevity of our lives. We don't want to face that brevity. We see that these two men knew that they must face it, and they wanted to know it and know it more fully and clearly. A request for this realization doesn't come naturally. And if it does come, often it's late in life's walk. People usually face the brevity of their life when the days of change are being far past, and all that remains are the days of looking back to what used to be. In this request, David as well as Moses realized their own deceptive humanity. The deceptive humanity in taking time for granted. Operating life under the false notion that there's plenty of time later. Matter of fact, we all got a day, I don't know when that day is, that we all going to get around to it. Our own nature cares not to dwell long on the subject of the brevity of life. Guarantee you, I got a great sermon example y'all providing for me. You ain't saying amen to any of this. The brevity of life and age and the things that come with age often are not readily embraced, especially among the youth and young adults. But notice that why these two men asked to know the brevity of life. They realized that there was a profit in such knowledge. Notice, if you would, in Psalms 39:4, David says, Lord, make me to know my end in the measure of my days, what it is, that I may know how frail I am. That I may know how frail I am. David realized that in knowing the brevity of life, that he would somehow come to a realization of his own frailty in life. The Lord responds to David Because David records that in Psalms 39 and 5. He says, behold, thou hast made my days as a handbreadth. That far. David says, Lord, I want to know the number of my days so I'll know how frail I'm in. And then the next verse, David says, my life is that far. That's as long as my life is. Notice, and mine age is as nothing before thee. Verily, every man at his best state is altogether vanity. In other words, my life, my 90 years, or my 80 years, or my 70 years, my 110 years is nothing when it's compared to the God of eternity. And David started realizing his own frailty. Now, we like to think, especially when we're, let's say, 20. Let's say 10. I remember when my daddy told me he was 34. I thought he was an old man. I was like, my goodness, he's old. And then in your 20s, you know, my granddaddy, he passed away at 82, and I mean, it stunned me. But I was like, you know, he had a good, long life. The closer I get to 82, the shorter 82 seems. Amen? Amen? And it don't look the same. And we see that David started realizing a few things, and he started seeing his own frailty, especially in comparison to eternity. So what? Let's say I was to live 110 years. That's a drop in the bucket compared to eternity. It's a drop in the bucket. And David wants to realize his own frailty and the brevity of life. Psalms 103 and 15, that same David pens these words. As for man, his days are as grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourisheth. For the wind passeth over it, and it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more. I love that about David in Psalms 103 and 15. He says, as a flower of the field, so he flourisheth it. For the wind passed over it, and it is gone. David realizes that he's at the time of his life where it is time to flourish. But there'll come a time when he can no longer flourish anymore. Now, I want to stop and just get real practical. If you're in here this morning, you're a young adult, or you're a teen, or you know, you're in your 20s and 30s or 40s. 40s are young adults. I've got finally getting some amens. I want you to realize this. It's time for you to flourish. Now that's going to bring you to what Moses says in wisdom. And you're going to have to figure out what is really flourishing. Because there'll come a time to where you can't flourish like you used to in your 30s and 20s. Amen? You don't even feel like doing it if you could. And David realized that there was a time for flourishing. So this learning on the span of his days, on the brevity of life, showed him his frailness, and his frailness had a very practical application. I enjoyed this about David and Moses. Neither man said, Lord, show me the number of my years. Show me the number of my centuries. He said, show me the number of my days. You come to grips with it. Our life is short. It's as a vapor. And it's nothing in comparison to eternity. In realizing that life goes by quickly, you will have to accept the hardness of seeing yourself in a frail position. Amen? David says, I see frailty. Moses had another practical application. Moses said in Psalms 90 and 12, so teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Moses' request was for this purpose, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. I think Moses, in realizing the brevity of life, is enticing his own heart to be wise. In other words, if I've got a short time to live, and if life really does go that quickly, and if my life is just that handbreadth, then I ought to deal with more wisdom than the false assumption of I've got time to live however I want to live. And the brevity of life, Moses realized, Lord, teach me. Lord, let me see this shortness of my life so that I can apply wisdom to every second, every hour, every day of it. We find little time to entertain the foolishness of this present evil world if we see the brevity of our own life. Amen? Because we see time as a limited resource. And we would dare not waste such a limited resource on such utter foolishness. I didn't expect a bunch of amens. Because we're living in a world today that spends their limited resource on excessive foolishness in our world today. And you're not going to get a second of it back. You're not going to relive it. You're not going to be reincarnated. You got one, better be wise in it. And Moses said, teach me. Teach me so that I can apply my heart to wisdom. Knowing the brevity of life also puts priorities in perspective. It puts priorities in perspective. Those who see themselves with plenty of time often misplace their priorities. I guarantee you. You take any person and say, well, you got all the time in the world to do this. Procrastination's bound to come. Amen? That's our humanity. But if we see the urgency because of the brevity of life, it helps us to put our priorities in perspective. Those who see themselves with plenty of time often misplace priorities. Procrastinating, being justified by their own false notion of an abundance of time in the future. I can't tell you how many people say, preacher, I know I should do that. One day I'm going to do that. But I'm not going to do that today. They don't realize the passing of time and how short of a time you got. I can't tell you how many people tell me, preacher, I plan on raising my kids in church. Yeah, when you going to do that? Or preacher, I plan on this and this and this. And they got this picture in their mind of this is how I'm going to have life, but they never sat on that road. And the brevity of life catches them. We've got to be careful. Moses said, Lord, so teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Having said that, the second request that David comes up with is, Lord, make me to know my end. In view of life's brevity, in view that time goes on, in view that suddenly we're 30 before we thought we would be, suddenly we're 40 before we thought we would be, suddenly we're 50 before we thought we would be. Considering how quick it goes, David says, Lord, make me to know my end. I love that about David. He didn't want anything to be left to chance. By the way, that's a popular false philosophy of our world today. If I understand my Bible correctly,